Welcome back, ALC Coaches Podcast. After a very short hiatus over the summer, skipped a month or so, we're back with me, Jason Neiman from Good Brand Company, and Tim Gustafson from Applied Leadership Coaching, ALC Coaches.
Good to be here.
Hey, Tim, how are
Back
things?
at it. Good, good.
Well, you know what I've done all summer?
What's that?
I grew a beard.
Oh, yeah, you did.
And what I've noticed is that it's gotten very gray in the middle.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the kids that made that happen or just the age, but either way, I have to embrace it. I'm not doing like the little touch of gray thing.
Is that wisdom coming through?
You'd like to think so, but I'm not sure that's the case either. So anyway, you're looking good. You got a new are you in a different location today?
Different location, broadcasting here from CBI, one of my clients, and I'm in their client and community center,
Nice.
which is just a fantastic space. I appreciate them and all they do for me and allow me to be here with my teams and clients and so forth. So
that's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, today we are going to be talking about a new topic, resilience. And it's something that you have felt pretty heavily over the course of the last month or two. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and figure out some ways to help people through some tough times and give them some tools and maybe some ideas and thoughts around where life is now and where it can be once you've put yourself in a better position, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'd like to start with something that you sent to me.
Okay.
And maybe it'll set the stage. And that is, I want you to explain to me and the rest of the world what the Cobra Effect is.
Ooh.
Such a cool name. I figured it'd be a good place to start.
Nice. Yeah. So the Cobra Effect. So if we go back, I don't know, probably 150, 200 years or so, the British, I guess, ruled or occupied India. And during that time in New Delhi, the government, the British government, determined that there was a problem. And the problem was that there were way too many venomous cobras in the city of Delhi, New Delhi. And so they came up with a plan that they would put a bounty on cobras. So kill the cobras, bring them in, and we'll give you money. And so, that started to work, I think, for a little while. And then people figured out that, you know what, we can breed cobras. And so they started to breed the cobras, and they got lots of money for their bounty. And I think the government was thinking this is a great thing. And, at some point they decided we need to end this bounty. They did. And what happened from the breeders is they didn't have any use for these cobras they had been breeding, and they let them loose out into the city again. And so the intended effect of what they wanted to have happen, it didn't happen. It actually got worse. It compounded the problem. And so, you ask, what does this have to do with resilience? Well, this process was coined the Cobra Effect. And so, I think the idea is something that we think initially is good and has good intentions turns out to have a negative effect or an outcome that isn't what was expected or what was intended. So I think there are many things like that with regard to resilience. And I've got a couple of things that I think is probably worthwhile, and I'm going to read some of these. I don't have them all memorized, but
Okay.
This rising generation, we have some issues associated with high dropout rates of freshmen in college. We have some things that are coming to bear from a society perspective where kids are just not able, the younger generation, the rising generation, are just not able to deal and cope with challenges. greater anxiety is occurring, more than normal, higher rates than normal. And then, so there are other signs of this lack of ability to recover or to adjust to change. And that's really, this idea of resilience. We have to be able to adjust, to be able to change, and to be able to strengthen ourselves through these challenges and difficulties that we have. And so this lack of resilience, it generates fears, and it, really brings about this idea of entitlement. And maybe it works both ways. Maybe because I'm not resilient, I expect things to happen for me because it's been done for me my whole life, or whatever. And so I want these things to happen, but I can't do it, so I expect somebody else to do it. That's sort of the idea of entitlement, I think. And so, where does it come from? What does this do for us? So some cause and effect. I think some situations that will be readily apparent, and I think most will agree as I go through these. So this is sort of the modern day Cobra Effect, if you will. Too much time on the couch and on digital devices, and not as much time exercising or physical activity as with earlier generations. Well, obviously there's some issues with that. Too much exposure to an unrealistic virtual or pretend world, causing distorted self-images, anxiety, depression, and lower self-worth. Impatience in a world of instant gratification and answers at Google speed. Boom, we get what we want right now. So conversely, resilience is developed in great part through the virtue of patience. Well, that's not what is being taught with this immediate gratification. The idea of protection from rough seas, the helicopter moms, not allowing anything bad to happen. Well, so the contrary to that is smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. So we have to have challenges in order to become skillful at decision-making and working through adversity. Innumerable options that distract us, fake news and half-truths that confuse us, and a life of ease that desensitizes us to the finer emotions and feelings that we really need to develop and to design. And right along with that, too much digital FaceTime and not enough FaceTime, resulting in underdeveloped interpersonal skills. And so, you combine all these things together, and we have a lack of resilience in this up and coming generation.
Yeah, without question. How do you see, we talk about the up and coming generation, but how do you see the resilience when you're working with a 40-something leader and you're coaching them versus a late 20-something leader? What are some of the main resilience differences between those two people that you've noticed?
Well, so I
know not everybody's the same, but in general.
Right. So, I think the idea of lack of resilience is amplified in the younger generation. Certainly there is a lack of resilience for some folks, some that I work with. In fact, I just left a client an hour ago or so, and resilience is probably the biggest challenge that he's going to have to deal with here, because he's sort of at rock bottom, and we got to work our way up through some real challenges for him. So I think, it shows up in being able to do tough things. We sort of train ourselves in a way. We start to develop strengths, and these strengths may not be those strengths that are resilient strengths. It might be things that, are mind smart, but maybe not emotionally smart. And so then we've created this gap or lack of something. And that is where we might need to strengthen or improve our resilience in order to get better. So yeah, it varies widely, I think, depending upon the situation and upbringing, experiences, background, and then the circumstances we find ourselves.
Right. And do you feel like there are different perspectives on that resilience topic? I guess a perspective from a psychiatrist or a psychologist would be different from a coach, would be different from your peers, would be different from all those things. How does that break itself out?
Well, so I think it really depends upon the depth to which people are challenged. Sometimes people can be really, really deep, rock bottom, and just there's no support, there's no mechanism for them to get out. Coaching is for the mentally healthy. It doesn't mean we all don't have issues, but from a standpoint of somebody that's really down in the dumps, rock bottom, having super big problems with regard to mental health. It's probably a more focused kind of thing, more clinical kind of perspective that a social worker or a psychologist might bring to the table, versus, a coach. We're working on things to similar direction. We want to improve and strengthen, but it's probably at a different level.
Right.
It's probably how I'd describe it.
Makes sense. So, we've been able to sort of identify that resilience is obviously an issue, and it's going to probably continue to become an issue unless something culturally or socially changes within the way that we parent, the way that we manage people at work, the environments in which we're set up. We're certainly a lot more sensitive than we ever have been, both good and bad, right? I mean, we're sensitive to gender, we're sensitive to, people's mental health issues, and that creates a little bit of a bubble, to your point, I think, where people are afraid to put people through things that stretch them from a resilience standpoint. You don't want to push somebody too far because that may become a problem. And as a business owner, both of us, that's a fine line to walk every day. Do I critically judge an employee for doing something, incorrectly? Do I spend more time coaching them? And then if I do, and I teach and coach and mentor, and it continues to happen, then you have to document it. And so there's a lot of different things that I'm sure that people just like me are thinking through. So how do we grow that resilience in people? How do we start to nurture that in a world where we're constantly faced with people not being able to handle those situations and not being able to handle that as we move forward?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, and before I answer it, I think one thing that we ought to make really clear is that everybody has resilience things going on.
Right.
We all have challenges in life. And my rock bottom might be very different than yours, and it might be very different than someone who is, addicted to drugs or homeless or,
right.
But that doesn't make my problems any less of a challenge than theirs. We're just at different levels and in different places and stages in life. And so, the key to this whole thing is you got to get up and you got to go do. And so how do I make that happen when I don't want to get out of bed? How do I make that happen when I really don't want to go talk to an employee about something? Where does that courage come from? Where does that oomph? What can help to generate that? And so I think there's several things. I think one thing is that, we certainly got to understand that there's opposition in everything that we do. There's somebody that's going to disagree with my point of view. There's going to be somebody that has a different perspective. My approach might be the opposite of somebody else's approach. So we have to learn when things are difficult and when, I think I'm doing the right things. Somebody's pounding on me and telling me I'm doing the wrong thing. Well, am I going to stand up for my beliefs? Am I going to push through those difficulties? So, those kinds of things, this idea of opposition, I think is something that we have to wrap our heads around. Certainly we have to understand self-reliance. It's got to be, I've got to be self-reliant. I've got to be responsible for my well-being, whatever that is, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, career, I mean, whatever those things are that sort of lead to my well-being. I've got to take responsibility for that. So I think those are probably two big keys. I think another part is decision-making. So I've got to learn how to make decisions. That it might be more of an art than anything else.
Sure.
Trial and error. I mean, it's we don't always make the right decisions, and we have to work through that, and we got to understand it and learn by making mistakes. And trial and error is a great teacher, and so we've got to be able to go down that path. So I think those are the things, and I guess the other maybe higher level perspective is the idea of choice. We have to honor choice and the consequence, the choice and accountability. We have to honor that process because every choice has some kind of consequence to it. And so we got to understand what those things are. And again, back to self-reliance and decision-making, we are responsible for those decisions that we make. We can't pawn it off on somebody else.
Right. Absolutely. It's funny that you were talking about this specific thing. I feel like I have two kids in college, and you know them both, but one of them in particular is the younger of the two. And, we find ourselves constantly having to check ourselves at the door to not accomplish things for him. Right?
Yeah.
So, he's having an issue with his dryer at his apartment. Sure, I could send an email to the apartment management group and say, hey, my son's having an issue with the dryer in his apartment. But by empowering him and saying to him, I'd really like for you to handle this. This is your dryer in your apartment. It creates a level of life skill for him.
Yes.
That may be uncomfortable, right? Because mom or dad maybe has always taken care of that. And I like to also apply that to like people that work on our team or people that I've worked with in the past. And it's sort of like asking a question back to somebody. And we may have touched on this in one of our other conversations, but, and you do a really great job of this as a coach, but if somebody comes to me and says, hey, here's the situation, how should I handle this? My first response to that person is, well, how do you think you should handle it?
Yes.
Because that's empowering that person to use their tool set that they have. And if they don't have a tool set, they're going to have to build one. And if they're going to have to build a tool set, it's just a matter of picking the right tool for the right project, right?
Yeah.
Which tool do I use to approach this situation? That doesn't mean I always agree. And I may give feedback and say, okay, that's a good way to approach it, but maybe we should look at it in a different way. Or here's another option maybe we should consider. Or sometimes as a business owner, I just say, appreciate that, but that's not how I really want to do it this time. That creates another level of resilience on that part too. But I guess my point here is we don't, as leaders, I don't think we empower our people to create their own resilience and to create their own ability to make decisions because we're caught up in let me give you the answer so you can just get it done and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of this, right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we try for efficiency as leaders because efficiency means greater profit. We're getting there faster. But the learning process may not be, the number one priority. So there's a balance there. And it might be that you say to your employee, okay, well, go ahead and try your idea, knowing that it's going to fail and they're going to fail. And can you really do that? That's a tough decision as a business owner, or leader, or manager of somebody, allowing them to fail, knowing they're going to, and they do, and they learn from it, and they grow from it. And then it's their learning. And wow, the next time it's going to be different. So that in and of itself is a challenge for leaders, for parents. What's the right timing? Are they ready for those decisions? Are they mature enough for them? Are they going to learn from it? Or is it just going to be a disaster?
Right.
And so those are tough things. And as leaders and as parents and owners of companies, we have to learn how far we can go and what's our level of resilience with regard to
Right.
failure
Right.
and fear of failing. That's tough.
Yeah.
Tough place to be, but those are all good things to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed.
Yeah.
So you also sent over, and we talked a little bit about the different perspectives on resilience. And I thought that was really interesting, and I'd love for you to kind of go through those and just explain the different perspectives.
Yeah, so glad to. So, some of this information is taken from Christian Moore. He's a licensed social worker. He's written a book called The Resilience Breakthrough, and it's a fantastic book. If anybody is interested in learning more about this, I would suggest you pick up a copy of that or get it digitally. It's a great read, and it's a fantastic story about his life and his challenge with learning and understanding resilience. But he has sort of defined or categorized resilience into 4 different categories. That being sort of street resilience, resource resilience, relational, and then rock bottom resilience. And, if you think about these things, most all of them are in some way, shape, or form tied to some kind of fear. And take, for instance, the street resilience. And this isn't street smarts necessarily, but this is about, the pain that comes from disrespect, discrimination, regret, and you take that and you use it as a fuel to move in a different way. And instead of, let's just take a story, one of the stories from his book. Being a social worker, he was working with some juveniles that had been in jail or juvenile detention, I guess. He was taking them out on a trip, and he had them on a bus except for this one fella. He had been giving him a problem all morning, and he, let's go. And he wouldn't. And then finally he comes on the bus, but Christian's back is to him, and he's talking to the other kids, and they said, "Mr. Moore, look." And he turns around, and this kid's right up in his face, and he spits in his face.
Wow.
This is after a morning of just pain and torture, back and forth, super hard morning. And so he's right on the edge, and he spits in his face. He said it took every fiber of his being to not haul off and hit the kid or throw him through the window of the bus. He was just incensed. But as the guy in charge, he realized at that moment that people are relying on me. These kids on the bus are relying on me. This kid that just spit in my face is relying on me as a leader to do the right thing. So he kept his cool, kept it under control. He probably grabbed his arm, and he walked off the bus and went back into the home and talked with him for 45 minutes. And his conversation went something like this. He said, "So what did you expect me to do when you spit in my face?" He said, "I expected you to hit me." "Exactly. You expected me to haul off and hit you. Why?" "Because that is what everybody else has done in the past." Okay? "But I didn't. I didn't hit you when you spit in my face." "So how did that make you feel?" He said, "I was a little confused. I didn't quite know how to react to it." He said, "Well," and he talked to him about, "I'm responsible for you. You're relying on me to do the right thing," and on and on and on. So anyway, in the course of that discussion, he gained his respect. Came back on the bus. He obviously had the respect of the other kids and gained even more respect. And this young man turned his life around because Christian Moore had the resilience to take that pain and that discrimination, that anger that he had, the obvious disrespect that this kid showed for him, and he turned it into something positive. And he has coined this phrase, It's like flipping a switch.
Hmm.
And I love that. I love this idea of, so we have pain and resentment and anger that comes out from all sorts of different places in our lives, whatever it happens to be. And it shows up. Well, it showed up here. He flipped the switch. And upon flipping the switch, he was aware of what was going on, but he decided that I'm going to make something positive out of this. I'm going to take a negative situation and take all that negative energy and anger, and I'm going to move it to something that's positive. And so this idea of street resilience then comes forward in a big way. I'm right in the middle of it. It's happening in my face. And yet I can turn this around to be something positive. And then, afterwards, so how does that make you feel? What's the feeling that occurs when that happens? So, that's just, to me, is a fantastic story that just sort of tells the tale of a pretty negative situation turned positive.
Yeah, for sure. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And so, each of these areas, resource, relational, rock bottom, resilience, they all have, great stories around it and ideas of ways that we can get through it. And we don't obviously have enough time to go through all these things in this podcast, but right. If I could share one more.
Sure.
Another story, which I thought was pretty cool. So, Christian Moore has, as he called them, learning differences all throughout his life. I love that term as opposed to learning challenges or problems or whatever.
Right.
He says he's got ADHD, and my guess is there's probably some other things, maybe dyslexia and other things going on. He's challenged through school his whole life. So he was able to get into college and one course at a time kind of thing. And then he got going, he met his wife, and she was a super help, relational support in so many different ways. But at some point he was in college, and I think maybe she was pregnant, she couldn't work, and he could not hold down a job because he couldn't run a cash register. He couldn't clerk anything because he'd get mixed up with his numbers and process. So he couldn't even get a minimum wage job. Wow. Wife couldn't work. They were at rock bottom. They didn't have any kind of support or help going to college. So he dug deep, and he looked for, tried to think about resources that he could pull upon. So this idea of resource resilience, resources he could pull upon to help him get through this. And what he remembered was that he's a really very good artist, and he had this ability to really depict things in the way that they show up. So got this idea to go to this very wealthy neighborhood and draw their houses. So he drew the house and he painted it, and it was identical, even down to the details of the daisies in the front yard and so forth. And so he takes this, he had his grandmother help him with putting a cheap frame together, or inexpensive frame. And he took it to this house and knocked on the door, and this older lady comes to the door, and she sees what he's holding, and she says, "Where did you get that?" She said, "Well, I drew it. I painted it." She said, "You did?" He said, "Yes, and I came by and was wondering if you'd be interested in buying it." And she said, "Well, how much?" And he thought and said, "Well, $200. He said, $300. Well, he walked away from that with $600. Wow. And he was able to pay the rent, pay something else, got groceries and so forth. He went ahead and did 4 or 5 more or whatever, and was able to sustain them because he was able to utilize resources that he had and talents and skills that he had. He pulled that up and used that in a sort of a resilient kind of perspective, resilient sense. That's great. What a great example of somebody that taps into something to allow them to move forward in another area. Yeah. Yeah. So we all have that. We all have this ability. We all have talents and skills. They're different. But nonetheless, we can utilize those and tap into those. Relations, same thing. We have relations that we have with people, that human connection. Wow, it's so powerful. And how can we utilize that to pull us up out of difficult situations?
Yeah.
And so forth. So anyway, yeah, so those are some examples of these different perspectives that we can bring forward and so forth to help us be more resilient.
That's awesome. How would you approach a coaching situation like this? You know, where do you start with somebody? And you know, obviously, people that are watching the podcast and other things, where would you start with them to say, you know, take an assessment, take a look at how you approach either your own personal resilience or the leadership that your style is in dealing with that? Where would you like people to start?
Well, I think it all begins with self-awareness. I think that's the key in any kind of growth process that we have or that we need to engage in. It's really about where are we? And it might be that we need to get feedback in order to understand that. With something like resilience, my guess is we're probably already there. We're aware of our challenge and our situation. And then it's a matter of really trying to figure out how we move past that and how we move to the next level. And so, and you know, it's unique for each individual, but, you know, I think as we look at what are our support mechanisms that we have, and those could be internal to ourselves, or it could be external, people, resources, you know, and resources could be people, money, materials, skills, whatever those are. But, you know, I think when it comes down to it, it's really about what's happening inside us. And, you know, many times we get so involved in what we have going on, and you know, we always want to be right and we want to do the right thing. And so sometimes that gets in the way of
Right.
what should happen.
Right.
And so the key with awareness is important so that we can be true and honest with our situation, and then figure out what those next steps ought to be that can help to progress us and propel us to the next level.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Nicely done.
Yeah.
Well, I think any other thoughts you want to talk about today? You want to talk about any other pieces of the pie at this moment as it pertains to resilience?
No, I think it's great. You know, I think some of the things that are helpful in the process, positivity, having hope and a positive perspective that we can get through this. That is something that can be pervasive, and it can be contagious, and it can help other people in situations. And I always find when I'm struggling that if I go and serve and help other people, boy, it takes such a burden off of me.
Right.
It makes my burden seem light. And I think that's a valuable tool for all of us that, you know, when we start serving others, we sort of find ourselves in the process of helping other people. And so that's been very helpful for me. The other, I guess the last point I'll make is this idea of acting or being acted upon. It sort of goes back to what we started with is, you know, we've got to take responsibility for ourselves, and we're not victims unless we choose to be victims. We are not offended unless we choose to be offended. So I think those kinds of perspectives, and that if we take responsibility to act versus being acted upon, that goes a long, long ways. Now, obviously, there are situations in which we are acted upon and we are victims. And I don't want to belittle those, because those typically tend to be very serious and challenging. And we see that in the news often, and probably more than any of us would like. And those are very, very difficult. But even in those challenges of being a victim, we can rise above that as we bring forth our resilience and the self-reliance that we may have learned along the way.
Yep.
So
I don't think you could have ended that any better, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. So let's wrap up for today. We're going to have another really good podcast. We've got another one scheduled very soon with a great topic. I'll leave that as a tidbit of a tease.
Nice.
But I'm looking forward to the next one as well. Best way to reach you, Tim? Just want to make sure we get your information out there.
Oh, outstanding. Thanks. So 2 ways. Phone number 704-995-3870. That's my cell. And you can email me, tim@alccoaches.com. We also have a website out there. It's on the internet, alccoaches.com. And we also have a YouTube channel with all these podcasts on them. Yeah, subscribe. We'd love to have you participate.
Nice. All right, Tim. Thanks for the great discussion.
Thank you, Jason.
To the next one, and we will talk to you soon, my friend.
Okay, sounds good. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.